99% confuse intelligence with wisdom, the Buddha's true definition. The Buddha once said that one of the signs of wisdom is recognizing your own foolishness, seeing where you've made mistakes. That gives you an opportunity to change your ways. As he says, a fool who recognizes his own foolishness is to that extent wise. Even then, there are foolish and wise ways of looking at your own foolishness. To say, "I am a fool," closes off a lot of opportunities. If you're a fool, what are you going to do? There's not much room for self-improvement. Telling yourself, "I've been a fool," though, opens the possibility that you can change your ways. So, how do you recognize you've been a fool? You see the consequences of your actions. You did something and it caused harm, either to yourself or to other people, and yet you had a choice. You didn't have to choose to do that foolish action. Recognizing choices and recognizing the consequences of your choices teaches the important principle that the mind needs to be trained so it can make better choices. Always keep this in mind. It's the beginning of wisdom. What causes you to make wrong choices? 3 main things: faulty intentions, faulty perceptions, or paying attention to the wrong things. Ask yourself, what was my perception of the situation? Why or how was it wrong? What signals were coming my way that I didn't pay attention to? Sometimes you may have read the situation and signals very accurately, yet you still proceeded with what you wanted to do. That was your intention. That's the element of will. So you can investigate 3 main questions. What am I paying attention to? What is my perception? What is my intention? As meditators, we learn how to explore all 3 of these questions. First, we're taught to pay attention to where there's suffering and what's causing it. This can start on a blatant level in any area of life and then move into the mind. While meditating, consider what ways of breathing and focusing on the breath are causing stress. As you're paying attention to the issue of stress, you can move to questions of perception, asking yourself how your perceptions are acting as a cause of stress and how they might be converted to act as the path to its end. You might ask, is this stress caused by the way I perceive the breath? What kind of mental picture do I have of the breathing process? How does that add to the stress? Where does it create barriers in the body that prevent the breath energy from flowing in easily? If you perceive the body as a bellows with only a tiny hole where the breath can come in, how about changing the perception to one where all your pores are holes where the breath can come in and out so you don't have to pull it in or push it out? Also, think of the breath permeating everywhere in the body, like water in a sponge. You can find other ways of perceiving too. Try asking, when the breath comes in, what direction does it flow in the body? Does it flow up? If it's flowing up, is it causing headaches? If that's the case, let it flow down. There's a famous Zen monk of centuries past, Hakuin, who began suffering from what he called Zen sickness. Basically, it was excess energy going up into his head. His way of curing it was to think of a huge ball of butter on top of his head, gradually melting. Each time he breathed in, the perception of melting butter allowed the breath energy to flow down. Those are questions of perception. Then there are questions of intention. As you're meditating, you're dealing very directly with intention. Are all the members of the committee on board with the desire to stay with the breath? Which ones aren't? When they're not on board, where do they want to wander? What are they looking for? Why? The wisdom of wising up. The Buddha said to try to get the mind to settle down in right concentration, you have to seclude it from unskillful qualities. You have to seclude it from sensuality. Sensuality means your obsession with thinking about and planning sensual pleasures. All too often, when the mind finds it has an opportunity of a whole hour with no other responsibilities, it wants to think about sights, sounds, smells, tactile sensations, and flavors. all kinds of things, planning tomorrow's meal or reflecting on today's meal. Remind yourself, that doesn't really accomplish anything. The Buddha once said, "If you find yourself obsessed with sensuality, you'd be better off sleeping." He never really encouraged sleep that much, but this is one case where sleep is the preferable alternative, better than obsessing over sensuality. Still better is getting the mind out of the sensual realm and into the realm of form, your sense of the body from the inside, which is what you're developing while you're working with the breath energy in the body. So, if you find the mind wandering off to sensual pleasures, remind yourself, this is not the time for that. If it's really obsessed, you can remind yourself of all the dangers that come from sensuality. There are many passages in the canon where the Buddha describes or gives examples and analogies to undercut the glamour and the allure that sensual pleasures have for us. They're like a drop of honey on the blade of a knife. They're like borrowed goods that the owners can take back at any time. Thinking about these analogies can help bring to your senses. He said you also have to seclude the mind from unskillful qualities. This covers everything from wrong views, wrong resolves, any of the path factors that are wrong that involve thoughts of cruelty or ill will. Even when people behave unjustly, you have to learn how to set aside thoughts of revenge because they accomplish nothing good. Remind yourself that what other people do is their karma. What you do is your karma. You can't ultimately be responsible for their karma. However, you can be responsible for your own actions. So, you spread thoughts of goodwill, thoughts that they may be happy, and especially that they may understand the causes for true happiness, and then really act on them. That's a thought you can extend even to people who are really cruel. In fact, you especially want to extend that to cruel people, so that instead of focusing on getting revenge or retribution, you open your mind to the question of what you might do or say that would actually get them to change their ways. That way, your intentions become more skillful. Sometimes it's good to do preventive strikes on wrong resolves before you settle down. If you know that the mind has been obsessing about a particular thought during the day, you've got to do some antidote thinking to pry the mind loose. Other times, you may realize the problems only after you've started settling down with the breath. Something springs up unexpectedly from just below the surface. For instance, you may start thinking about things you did or said in the past that you really regret. In that case, spread thoughts of goodwill to whoever you harmed. Resolve not to repeat that mistake and then get back to the breath, realizing that a mind well-centered with a good solid foundation is much more likely to be able to stick to its skillful intentions and results. In this way, as you meditate, you learn the lessons that help you wise up after realizing you've been foolish. Strengthen these lessons by looking at your intentions, attention, and perceptions, and realize that these govern your actions. Remember, what you do is what matters. There's a clear distinction between skillful and unskillful. You don't want to act in unskillful ways. You've seen the harm. This is the wisdom of wising up, recognizing when you've been a fool in any way. The lessons implicit in that wisdom include believing that choices are real. They have real consequences. Those choices depend on views, which in turn are based on perceptions, attention, and intentions, what you would like to achieve through your actions. These are all important lessons. This is why the Buddha focuses on these elements as being crucial to what shapes your life so you can start shaping it in a wise way. When you consider the Buddha's teachings, for example, the Four Noble Truths, the 3 characteristics, the 5 hindrances, it's easy to dismiss them as cultural relics or somebody's personal proclivity. Why not 5 or 3 noble truths? Why does he focus on these particular teachings? Why focus on suffering? Was there something about his culture that kept him from seeing the beauty of life? Remember, though, that all of his teachings have their roots in some very common human experiences, in particular, the wisdom of wising up. It's about seeing when you've been a fool. It's not that you are a fool, but you've been foolish. Keep that distinction in mind and use it to take heed of the lessons you can learn from having been foolish. Make the most of any opportunities to overcome this past foolishness and to act wisely. That's when you get in touch with the root values that led the Buddha to teach the way he did and to focus on the things he focused on. You see how wise he really was. So take that wisdom of wising up and see how far it can go. Wisdom for Dummies, Revisited. We like to think of Buddhist wisdom as something subtle and abstract. And there are aspects of the Buddha's teachings that are subtle and abstract. But wisdom has to start with some very basic things too. You might call it wisdom for dummies. And that means you. You're not going to get to the higher levels until you've mastered the basics. There are two ways in which the Buddha talks about very basic levels of wisdom. One is, if there's something that you like to do but is going to give bad results, you know how to talk yourself out of it. The other is that if there's something that you don't like to do but is going to give good results, you're able to talk yourself into it. In other words, you learn how to psych yourself up. You learn to look at the long term rather than the short term. And you try to figure out what the problem is with your attitude, how you can get around your laziness. We were talking this afternoon about laziness when getting up in the morning. There's a passage in the canon where the Buddha talks about the different excuses people give for laziness. I didn't get enough sleep last night. I'm tired. I worked yesterday. I'm going to be working tomorrow. I came back from a trip yesterday. I'm going on a trip tomorrow. I've been sick. And then he compares those with the reasons that another person might give for being more energetic in the practice. And it turns out they're the same reasons. I worked a lot yesterday, but now I've got a chance to meditate today. I'm going to be working tomorrow, but I've got this chance to meditate now. I've been sick, but finally I've gotten over that, so I can meditate some. I may still be weak, but the illness could come back. So here's my chance. In other words, there's no difference in the objective situation. The difference is in your attitude. So if the voices to get you more energetic are not there in your mind, try to learn some of them. Because you're not the only one who likes to sleep in late. Everybody likes to sleep in late. Ajahn Mahabua complained about how lazy he was. And here he was, someone who eventually could sit 5 or 6 hours as if it were nothing. We all have to figure out some way to get around our laziness. At the same time, there are things we like to do that we have to learn how to say no to. Learn how to see their drawbacks. At the very least, put up a fight. All too often, the voices in the mind say, "You're going to be giving in anyhow in 5 minutes, so why don't you give in now, so we don't have to waste a lot of time and energy?" You can respond and say, "Well, I don't know about 5 minutes from now, but right now I'm responsible for right now. So if it's something I should do, I'm going to do it now. If it's something I shouldn't do, I won't be doing it now. We'll talk about 5 minutes in 5 minutes' time." Another one of the reasons they'll give is, "You'll get up and meditate, but you're not going to last very long, so why bother?" So you say, "At least I'll get up, get into position, and then we'll talk from there." It's not like you're committed, that once you get up, you have to meditate. But you say, "Well, at least give it a try." The same when you find yourself doing something you shouldn't be doing. You've started doing it, and part of the mind will say, "Well, now that you've started, you're committed, and you might as well go all the way." You say, "No, I can stop." So, learn how to psych yourself up. It's all very simple, but the problem is that you tend to identify with certain voices in the mind, and they make it complex. You've got to learn how to withdraw your sense of identification from them and learn to see those voices as not self. Again, we like to think of the not self teaching as something very abstract and subtle, but it's something we're doing all the time. We're not selfing all the time in order to self new things. You self an idea, and then another idea comes up. So you not self the first idea and then self the second one. Learn to be a little more systematic about how you do that. Learn to view your sense of self and the activity of not selfing as tools. Then ask yourself, when is it skillful to identify with this idea? And when is it skillful to identify with that idea? You have the freedom to choose. Selfing is a verb. It's an activity, a kind of karma. And as with all kinds of karma, the question is, when is it skillful? When is it not? So give yourself a little more freedom around this issue. The idea that you're committed to being a certain way or a certain sort of person, that gets in the way of the practice. If everybody were committed to being the way they already were, the Buddha wouldn't have bothered teaching. It wouldn't have served any purpose at all. But he saw that we can train ourselves. Part of the mind can train the rest of the mind. It's simply a matter of getting the good part of the mind, the part that really does wish for your true well-being, to have more power. This is one of the reasons why, when we meditate, we work with the breath to gain a sense of well-being. The good part of the mind needs help, and working with the breath gives the rest of the mind a sense of well-being as well, gives the whole body a sense of well-being, so that the next time you think about meditating, you'll have a good association with it. You'll remember that once you make the effort of settling in, it feels really, really good. That becomes your incentive to get up early the next morning and to try it again. The other basic role of wisdom is that when things go wrong, when things don't go well in life, you learn to give yourself pep talks. This can apply to the meditation. Everyone is going to have barren stretches in the meditation. It's common. There are times, at the beginning, when things are opening up inside, all kinds of new and interesting things are happening, but then it levels out, and you're stuck with the same old, over and over again. Well, learn how to see that maybe something else is going on in that same old mind that you're not seeing right now. Sometimes the mind makes some progress, and then it has to fill in the details. It makes a quick sketch, and then it has to fill in the rest of the sketch, and it's going to take time. I had a Thai friend who was an artist. Sometimes he would do large traditional Thai paintings. He was working once on a large painting of Rama, and his wife came into the studio one afternoon after he'd been working for hours on little tiny details. She looked at the painting and said, "Oh, you didn't get much done today, did you?" He said, "I've been working all day." There are parts of the mind where you have to fill in the details before you're going to be able to move on. So learn how to keep yourself in a good mood in the meantime. Maybe the results aren't coming as quickly as possible, or the changes aren't coming as quickly as you'd like, but just keep with it, keep with it, keep with it. Think of the Shackleton expedition. They lost their ship down near Antarctica. Help was hundreds and hundreds of miles away, and their situation was pretty bleak. But the captain gave them good pep talks, and he looked after everyone. He made sure that all the men did what they could, and what they should. They'd all learned, this is what you have to do in a situation like this. And so he made sure everybody did just that. He said, "At the very least, if we die, we'll know we're not dying from our carelessness or our own laziness. If we die doing our duty, that's an honorable death." And they all made their way out. So as you're meditating, you're not going to die from the meditating, but at the very least say, "I'm going to do it well. I'm going to stick with the steps. I don't want to fail in meditation because of carelessness." Oftentimes, when progress is not happening, it's because you're getting sloppy in the details. So go back and think about step 1, step 2, step 3, and don't think that it's embarrassing to go back to step 1, 2, or 3. Ajahn Lee's image is of a path over which you walk back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, many times. He says, 1, the path gets worn smooth, and 2, you see little details you wouldn't have noticed if you walked through it just once. A lot of this has to do with the fact that the mind is a complex thing, and sometimes you have to go over the same things again and again and again to see all the implications. So that's another aspect of basic wisdom, or wisdom for dummies. Of course, This kind of wisdom is not going to keep you dumb. In fact, it's the kind of wisdom that gets you out of being a dummy. The dummies are the ones who want to learn about emptiness and dependent co-arising all at once, without having any foundation. All they get are perceptions, labels in the mind. They don't actually see where these teachings are useful and why they're useful tools. The Buddha didn't teach these things just to show off how smart he was. Everything he taught was for a purpose. And when your mind is ready, then you see, oh, this serves that purpose. When you've gotten more skillful at selfing and not selfing your ideas, for example, you've got a good foundation for how to use the not-self teaching in the most skillful way possible. People who don't have that background, though, can take the not-self teaching and use it to shoot themselves in the foot. John Lee gives the example of people who want to get gold out of rock. They see somebody taking a big pickaxe and carrying big loads of rock back to the smelter, and they say to themselves, "That's dumb. Who wants all that rock? All you want is the gold." So they go and take a little tiny toothpick to get just the gold right out of the rock. But it doesn't work that way. You have to take the rock and put it in the smelter and subject it to heat. And then the metals, tin, lead, copper, silver, and gold, will come melting out of their own accord. In other words, you focus on the practical details of making right effort, even if they seem mundane. That's what the smelter stands for. And the gold will appear in your mind. There's a lot in the meditation that you can't anticipate. You can't plan too far ahead. But you know, these are the steps. We're lucky that we have them laid out for us. John Lee's 7 steps in his method too. If there's something going wrong in your meditation, look and see which of the steps you're not getting right, or which ones you're getting sloppy about. Then you just keep doing them again and again and again. And give yourself pep talks. It's like any manual skill that involves a lot of repetitive actions, like sharpening a knife on a whetstone. When you're sharpening a knife, you have to be alert, and you have to be very sensitive to make sure that you're not ruining the blade by making some parts too sharp, or wearing down some parts too much, and others not enough. The edge of the blade has to be very even and smooth. So you have to give yourself pep talks as you're sitting there, rubbing the blade over the stone, over the stone, over the stone, again and again and again. If you keep your spirits up, you find that you can make your way through and do the job well. This may be one of the reasons why the Ajahns and Zen masters of old would have you learn a manual skill before you meditated, because the qualities of mind that go into mastering a skill are precisely the qualities of mind you need to meditate. But they're basic not because they're dumb. They're basic because they're important. They're essential to everything else. 1. The teaching on learning how to put the long term ahead of the short term. And 2. The teaching on how not to let things get you down when the long term seems long. Every other aspect of wisdom, no matter how refined, comes out of these 2 principles. They're the habits that will help see you all the way through. The wisdom of the ego. Years back, many Buddhist teachers in the West began using the term egolessness to explain the Buddha's teaching on not-self. Since then, egolessness has come to mean many things to many people. Sometimes egolessness is used to mean a lack of conceit or self-importance. Sometimes, a pure mode of acting without thought of personal reward. In its most extended form, though, the teaching on egolessness posits a fundamental error of perception, that despite our sense of a lasting separate self, no such self really exists. By trying to provide for the happiness of this illusory self, we not only place our hopes on an impossible goal, but also harm ourselves and everyone around us. If we could simply see the fallacy of the ego and understand its harmful effects, we would let it go and find true happiness in the interconnectedness that is our true nature. At least that's what we're told, and often with a fair amount of vehemence. Buddhist writers, often so gentle and non-judgmental, can quickly turn vicious when treating the ego. Some portray it as a tyrannical bureaucracy deserving violent overthrow, others as a rat-like creature, nervous, scheming, and devious, that deserves to be squashed. Whatever the portrait, the message is always that the ego is so pernicious and tenacious that any mental or verbal abuse directed against it is fair play in getting it to loosen its foul grip on the mind. But when people trained in classical Western psychotherapy read these attacks on the ego, they shake their heads in disbelief. For them, the ego is not something evil. It's not even a singular thing you can attack. It's a cluster of activities, a set of functions in the mind, and necessary functions at that. Any mental act by which you mediate between your raw desires for immediate pleasure and your superego, the oughts and shoulds you've learned from family and society, is an ego function. Ego functions are our mental strategies for gaining lasting happiness in the midst of the conflicting demands whispering and shouting in the mind. They enable you to say no to the desire to have sex with your neighbor's spouse in the interest of a happiness that would have less disastrous consequences for the things you truly value in life. They also enable you to say no to the demands of your parents, your teachers, or government when those demands would jeopardize your own best interest. But ego functions don't just say no. They also have a mediator's sense of when to say yes. If they're skillful, they negotiate among your desires and your superego so that you can gain the pleasure you want in a way that causes no harm and can actually do a great deal of good. If your ego functions are healthy and well coordinated, they give you a consistent sense of priorities as to which forms of happiness are more worthwhile than others. A clear sense of where your responsibilities do and don't lie. A strong sense of your ability to judge right and wrong for yourself, and an honest sense of how to learn from your past mistakes for the sake of greater happiness in the future. From this perspective, egolessness would be a disaster. A person devoid of ego functions would be self-destructive, either a beast with uncontrolled impulses or a neurotic, repressed automaton with no mind of his or her own, or an infantile monster thrashing erratically between these two extremes. Anyone who tried to abandon ego functioning would arrest his psychological growth and lose all hope of becoming a mature, responsible, trustworthy adult. And as we know, self-destructive people don't destroy only themselves. They can pull down many of the people and places around them. This is not only the view of trained Western psychologists. Buddhist communities in the West have also begun to recognize this problem and have coined the term spiritual bypassing to describe it. The way people try to avoid dealing with the problems of an unintegrated personality by spending all their time in meditation retreats using the mantra of egolessness to short-circuit the hard work of mastering healthy ego functioning in the daily give and take of their lives. Then there's the problem of self-hatred. The Dalai Lama isn't the only Asian Buddhist teacher surprised at the amount of self-hatred found in the West. Unfortunately, a lot of people with toxic superegos have embraced the teaching on egolessness as the Buddha's stamp of approval on the hatred they feel toward themselves. These problems have inspired many Western psychologists to assume a major gap in the Buddha's teachings. That in promoting egolessness, the Buddha overlooked the importance of healthy ego functioning in finding true happiness. This assumption has led to a corollary, that Buddhism needs the insights of Western psychotherapy to fill the gap. That to be truly effective, a healthy spiritual path needs to give equal weight to both traditions. Otherwise, you come out lopsided and warped, an idiot savant who can thrive in the seclusion of a 3-year, 3-month, 3-day retreat, but can't handle 3 hours caught in heavy traffic with 3 whining children. This corollary assumes, though, that for the past 2,600 years, Buddhism hasn't produced any healthy functioning individuals. That the collective consciousness of Asian society has suppressed individualism, and that the handful of dysfunctional meditation teachers coming to the West, the ones who mastered the subtleties of formal meditation but tripped over the blatant pitfalls of American money and sex, are typical of the Buddhist tradition. But I wonder if this is so. My own experience in Asia certainly doesn't confirm this. During my 16 years in Thailand, I met, per capita, more people with a genuinely individual outlook on life and far fewer neurotics than I did on returning to the mass media-produced minds of America. My teacher, Ajahn Fuang, had the healthiest functioning ego of anyone I had ever met, and he knew nothing of Western psychology. This observation doesn't apply just to the Thai tradition. Psychologists have studied ordinary Tibetan monks and nuns who have survived years of torture, the severest test of healthy ego functioning, and found that they bear no psychological scars. So, there are many Asian Buddhists who clearly know the secret of how to develop a healthy ego. Some psychologists would have us believe that this was despite rather than due to their Buddhist training. But that belief could easily be based on a superficial reading of the Buddhist tradition. So we need to put this belief to the test. One way would be to read the ancient texts with new eyes. Instead of assuming that the not-self teaching is counseling egolessness, how about assuming that it's part of a regimen for developing a healthy ego? This idea may seem counterintuitive, but that's no measure of its usefulness. The measure lies in testing it as a hypothesis. So, as a thought experiment, let's look at the earliest record of the Buddha's teachings, the Pali Canon, from the perspective of Western psychology and pose a question. Is there any evidence that the Buddha was advocating a healthy ego? Actually, tips on healthy ego functioning fill the text. To begin with, the Buddha defines a wise person as one who knows the difference between what are and are not his personal responsibilities, who takes on only his own responsibilities and not those of others. This is the first principle in any ego functioning. Then there's the famous verse at Dhammapada 290. If, by forsaking a limited ease, he would see an abundance of ease, the enlightened person would forsake the limited ease for the sake of the abundant. This is practically a definition of how ego functions function well. These insights aren't random. They're based on another assumption necessary for a healthy ego, the teaching on karma, that we're responsible for our actions and that we're going to experience their results. This assumption in turn is framed by the larger psychology of the Noble Eightfold Path. As any therapist will tell you, a healthy ego is strengthened by developing a healthy superego whose shoulds are humane and realistic. It's also strengthened by the ability to safely satisfy your raw demands for immediate happiness so that the ego's long-term strategies don't get derailed by sudden, overwhelming desires. These two functions are filled, respectively, by the path factors of right view and right concentration. Right view contains the Buddha's shoulds, which are in service to the desire to find true happiness. You divide your experience into 4 categories: suffering, its cause, its cessation, and the path to its cessation. Then you take to heart the imperatives proper to each, comprehending suffering, abandoning its cause, realizing its cessation, and developing the path. That's the Buddhist recipe for a healthy superego, a series of shoulds that are on your side that never ask you to sacrifice your own true well-being for the sake of anyone or anything else. As for right concentration, one of its crucial factors is a sense of bliss, independent of sensual objects and drives. When you've gained some skill in meditation and can tap into that bliss whenever you want, you can satisfy your desire for immediate pleasure, at the same time weakening any demand that the pleasure be sensual. As the Buddha once noted, people pursue sensual pleasure, with all of its inherent limitations, simply because they see no other alternative to physical and mental pain. But once you've mastered this more refined alternative, you found a new way to feed the demand for pleasure right now, freeing the ego to function more effectively. You have also learned the key to the Buddha's strategy for true happiness. It is possible to taste an immediate gratification that causes no harm to yourself or anyone else. Genuine happiness doesn't require that you take anything away from anyone, which means that it in no way conflicts with the genuine happiness of others. This understanding is revolutionary. For people dependent on sensual pleasures, happiness is a zero-sum affair. There are only so many things, only so many people to go around. When you gain something, someone else has lost it. When they've gained, you've lost. In a zero-sum world, the pursuit of your own happiness constantly has to be negotiated and compromised with that of others. But when people access the bliss of right concentration, they've found a way to satisfy their own desire for happiness in a way that can actively augment the happiness of those around them. When they're more content and at peace within, they radiate a healthy influence in all directions. This is how healthy ego functioning, from the Buddhist perspective, benefits others as well as yourself. The classic image illustrating this point is of two acrobats, the first standing on the end of a vertical bamboo pole, the second standing on the shoulders of the first. To perform their tricks and come down safely, each has to look after his or her own sense of balance. In other words, life is a balancing act. In maintaining your balance, you make it easier for others to maintain theirs. This is why, in the Buddhist equation, the wise pursuit of happiness is not a selfish thing. In fact, it underlies all the qualities traditionally associated not only with the path the Buddha taught to his disciples, but also with the Buddha himself: wisdom, compassion, and purity. Wisdom, the Buddha says, starts with a simple question: what when I do it will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? The wisdom here lies in realizing that your happiness depends on what you do, and that the pursuit of happiness is worthwhile only if it's long-term. The test of how far your wisdom has matured lies in the strategic skill with which you can keep yourself from doing things that you like to do, but that would cause long-term harm, and can talk yourself into doing things that you don't like to do, but that would lead to long-term well-being and happiness. In other words, mature wisdom requires a mature ego. The ego basis for compassion is depicted in one of the most delightful stories in the canon. King Pasenadi, in a tender moment with his favorite consort, Queen Malika, asks her, "Is there anyone you love more than yourself?" He's anticipating, of course, that she'll answer, "Yes, Your Majesty, you." And it's easy to see where a B-movie script would go from there. But this is the Pali Canon, and Queen Malika is no ordinary queen. She answers, "No, Your Majesty, there isn't." "And how about you? Is there anyone you love more than yourself?" The king, forced into an honest answer, has to admit, "No, there's not." Later he reports this conversation to the Buddha, who responds in an interesting way, searching all directions. With one's awareness, one finds no one dearer than oneself. In the same way, others are fiercely dear to themselves, so one should not hurt others if one loves oneself. At 5.1. In other words, true self-love requires an appreciation that others feel self-love too. This principle works in two ways. First, you recognize that if your happiness depends on the misery of others, it won't last, for they'll do whatever they can to destroy that happiness. Your long-term happiness thus has to take into account the long-term happiness of others. Second, in a less calculating way, you recognize what we all have in common. If you take your own self-love seriously, you have to respect the self-love of others. In this way, compassion is based not on a sense of your superiority to those who are suffering, but on a sense of mutual respect, a respect solidly based in your own self-interest. Purity grows from providing your ego-based wisdom and compassion with a reality check. The Buddha once taught his son, Rahula, that purity is developed by examining your actions and their results to make sure that they actually cause no harm to yourself or to those around you. If you anticipate harm from an intended action, you don't do it. If you see unanticipated harm coming from something you've done, you freely admit your mistake and learn how not to repeat it. You don't cling childishly to the need to always be in the right. But if you see that you aren't causing harm, you can take joy in the fact that you're on the path to true happiness. Because the Buddha saw how these enlightened qualities of wisdom, compassion, and purity could be developed through the pursuit of happiness, he never told his followers to practice his teachings without expecting any gain in return. He understood that such a demand would create an unhealthy dynamic in the mind. In terms of Western psychology, expecting no gain in return would give license for the superego to run amok. Instead, the Buddha taught that even the principle of renunciation is a trade. You exchange candy for gold, trading lesser pleasures for greater happiness. So he encouraged people to be generous with their time and belongings because of the inner rewards they would receive in return. He taught moral virtue as a gift. When you observe the precepts without ifs, ands, or buts, you give unconditional safety to all other beings, and in return, you receive a share of that safety as well. Even when advocating that his disciples abandon their sense of self, the Buddha justified this teaching on the basis of the rewards it would bring. He once asked his monks, "If anyone were to burn the trees in this monastery, would you suffer with the sense that they were burning you?" "No," the monks replied, "because we're not the trees." In the same way, the Buddha continued, let go of what's not you or yours, the senses and their objects. That will be for your long-term well-being and happiness. Notice that he didn't say to abandon the sense of self as a form of self-sacrifice. He said to abandon it for the sake of true well-being and happiness. This point highlights one of the special features of the Buddha's instructions for healthy ego development. In Western psychology, ego development is impossible without assuming a clear sense of self. But in Buddhism, with its realization that there is no clear dividing line between your own true happiness and that of others, the underlying assumption of ego development is a clear sense of cause and effect, seeing which actions lead to suffering, which ones lead to short-term happiness, which ones lead to a happiness that lasts. This is one of the reasons why the Buddha never used terms like ego development or a well-integrated self. The types of functioning we associate with a well-developed ego he would have described as a well-integrated sense of cause and effect, focused on insights into the results of your actions. Buddhist practice is aimed at refining these insights to ever greater levels of sensitivity and skill. In this way, he was able to teach healthy ego functioning while avoiding the twin pitfalls of ego obsession, narcissism, and self-hatred. Because the Buddha's basic terms of analysis were actions understood under the framework of cause and effect, we have to understand his use of self and not self under that framework. For him, self and not self aren't metaphysical principles. They're mental actions that can be mastered as skills. This is why he was able to use both concepts freely in his teaching. When the concept of self was conducive to skillful action, he would talk in terms of self, not only on the level of generosity and virtue, but also on the level of meditation. If you think that meditation is an exercise in not self from the very beginning, read the discourses on mindfulness, and you'll be surprised at how often they describe the meditator's internal dialogue in terms of I, me, and mine. As for the concept of not self, the Buddha would advise using it whenever unskillful attachment to things or patterns of behavior got in the way of your happiness. In effect, He would have you drop unhealthy and unskillful ways of self-identification in favor of ways that were more skillful and refined. Only on the highest levels of practice, where even the most skillful concepts of self get in the way of the ultimate happiness, did the Buddha advocate totally abandoning them. But even then, he didn't advocate abandoning the basic principle of ego functioning. You drop the best happiness that can come from a sense of self, because an even greater happiness, nibbana, totally timeless, limitless, and unconditioned, appears when you do. So, this is where our thought experiment has led. If you open your mind to the idea that the Buddha was actually advocating ego development instead of egolessness, you see that there's nothing lopsided or lacking in his understanding of healthy ego functioning. In fact, he mastered some ego skills that Western psychology has yet to explore, such as how to use right concentration to satisfy the desire for immediate pleasure, how to develop an integrated sense of causality that ultimately makes a sense of self superfluous, how to harness the ego's drive for lasting happiness so that it leads to a happiness transcending space and time. These principles have taught many Asian Buddhists how to develop healthy egos over the centuries, so healthy that they can ultimately drop the need to create self. All that remains is for us to put these principles to the test, to see if they work for us as well.